Welcome back to another edition of Global Book Network. My name is Global Voice, and if you're tuned into the show, you'll know this is a program where we sit and chat with authors with very provoking things to say and learn about their journeys as well. Today, my guest, David Steele, the author of Radical Authenticity, Strong Medicine for Turbulent Times, and Turbulent Times indeed. How's it going, sir?
It's going pretty good. I'm just grooving along with the present moment.
Hey, that's all we can do. Nothing wrong with grooving wrong. Keep on trucking, if you will, if you're a certain age.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about that first. Turbulent times. I've heard the phrase more times than I care to admit that we live in unprecedented times, but I feel like that gets revised every day. But on top of that, there does seem to be a growing sense of unease and/or uncertainty about the world around us. There's no way that's unintentional. No way that's coincidental. I mean, it has to be a shift. No.
That's a very broad question to answer because there's all sorts of historical forces, economic forces, and mixed in with modern technology and the fact that the globe is really knit together as one community in a way it's never been before. It used to be you didn't have to worry about what was happening on the other side of the mountain because people generally didn't, in their entire lifetimes, move more than 20 miles from where they were born. Now we instantly see what's happening all over the place. And we have these non governmental organizations and corporations and entities that transcend borders, and so that's really new for us. It's really new to be able to see all of the different points of view and perspectives and reality bubbles, as we call them these days. It's a profound challenge.
Hmm. And you're definitely not wrong, but you're right. Let's laser in a bit. The
All
book,
right.
Radical Authenticity. Talk to me about the moment when you decided you want to put pen to paper and make this book a reality.
All right. That moment was in 2016 when so much animosity was emerging in our political campaign. And, you know, on all sides, people blaming each other, a lot of recrimination going on. And I felt like, what is mine to do to help minister to what's going on in the world today? Because I can't sit on the sidelines, but I'm not really a political activist because
Mhm.
I can see all kinds of different points of view in any given issue. And um, it just really struck me that people yearn for authentic connection. Keeping it real was a is a pretty common phrase from back then.
Right.
And how do we create that authenticity and that quality of connection that really nourishes us and makes life worth living?
When you say the climate in 2016, around that time, was that, in your opinion, something that was immediate, or was it been boiling over for years? I mean, I know you can't go to every single inciting incident, but you're not the first person to tell me they felt a shift about 10 years ago.
I have to say, again, that's a very deep question. It had been building for years. And I think the root of it has to do with consolidation, and a big part of it is local media outlets died. So we didn't really know what was going on in local communities anymore. Everything was kind of long distance broadcast from the coasts. And so there was a tremendous amount of anxiety and distress building up in the country. And it was invisible to the media, the powers that be, until it finally exploded.
Yeah. Sometimes people say when it comes to the topics out there, and even just discussing ideas amongst others, that common ground seems to be more and more a thought experiment than an actual goal. When you're trying to communicate with others about maybe different opinions, you said just a minute ago that you're really good at seeing different points of view. What are some things that you may do that someone else may struggle with?
What an interesting question. First of all, I don't assume I'm right.
Mhm.
Second of all, I take time to breathe. And I have a genuine curiosity for what makes people tick. And so if someone has a point of view that I don't understand or I disagree with, I assume there's an element of truth in it. And so I become very curious about why someone has the position they have. That's on the political side. On the other side, as many of us have, there was a lot of trauma in my childhood, and seeing people in pain, seeing people in distress. I also have that same curiosity about how can I show up in a way that eases the distress, um, or gives the anxiety permission to express itself so it doesn't feel so anxious.
Yeah.
And so that's what a lot of my work is also.
And you've made that pursuit of seeing how we communicate, like your life's work, very intentional. What was, yeah, talk to me about that and being that being your path. Was that something you decided to do almost like a lightning moment, or was that just something that was just a product of your environment saying, I want to make sure that my childhood or my life wasn't going to repeat with others, or something else?
Oh, what a great question. So I would have to say that the seed of it goes back to when I first wrote poems when I was a teenager. I was extremely shy. And, um, I had this perception that I was the only one that was suffering. Everyone else knew what they were doing, and I was kind of an outcast. And I started writing poems, and I shared some poems with people, and they really were moved by them. And I was astounded. And all of a sudden, I realized I wasn't so alone in my struggles. And realizing that I wasn't alone lifted a huge burden from my shoulders. And so I would have to say that's where I started. And it became my priority to learn how to get along with people, to learn how to connect with people and not feel alone. And
Yeah.
so naturally that leads to how we communicate, how we interact, how we regard one another. So I would say that's the birth of it.
It,
Um,
can I? Is it safe to assume that we're more alike as people than in our differences, or are more different than we are alike?
Now you're touching on something that's really dear to my heart. That's a very insightful question. I would say that what we are doing is we are struggling with the balance between autonomy and community.
Hmm.
Because where we're alike is where we participate in community, and our individuality is autonomy. And they have to balance, because too much community can lead to cults, and too much autonomy can lead to gang wars,
Mm.
and those are the two extremes. And so we all need to know that we belong, that we're a part of something, that our presence matters. And we can't do that at sacrificing what's important to us and what is really dear to our hearts. So it's a perennial struggle. So yes, we are very, very different in many, many ways. And there is also a universality to us that when we can share in that, we feel very comforted.
If I was the theoretical, I don't know, mayor or president of a fictional land, what can I do? What can we do as a community to keep those in check of each other? I feel like if I was in a cult, I'd be like, I'm not in a cult. We're just normal folk, you know.
Yes.
But how do we keep things from getting out of hand?
Well, so I don't have to be fictional about that, because one of my heroes is Nelson Mandela. And when apartheid ended in South Africa, a lot of people feared there would be a bloodbath. And what Mandela did when he was forming the new constitution is he invited every political party, even ones that got less than 2% of the vote, to participate in forming that constitution. So all voices were heard, everyone got to participate in the birth of the new South Africa. And it's not like South Africa doesn't have serious problems, but I think that avoided a bloodbath.
Yeah.
And so, um, people who I respect are people who can listen to all kinds of different perspectives and and you're talking about, in the leadership role and civic leadership, and really help people engage in feeling part of a whole, and also seeing different perspectives and know that they had input to into what's happening.
I think you touched upon something really cool about the idea of being heard, right? And I know you mentioned the frame of drafting a constitution, but a lot of times, even in family dynamics, when someone feels like they don't have a chance to say themselves, the proverbial middle child syndrome, we have
Right.
like these kind of fallouts from that, and that can compound the communities as it is, right?
Yes. And so I would say that most of what I do is involved in more in family situations and not in civic situations. Um, and um, so when something gets us really upset, this is something really dear to my heart. I just did a training on this a few days ago. When something gets us really upset, our body is physiologically reacting to what it perceives as danger. Because if we were chased by a wolf or a tiger, we didn't have time to think about it and negotiate with the tiger. Our body has to spring into action and do something. And so we can have that same physiological reaction looking at something at the TV that looks at us that we disagree with, or something that we imagine might be happening, but we're not sure. And so when I'm in a family situation or in a general situation where something happens that's really upset, then the question I invite people to ask is, what is it that I care about so much that my body is mobilizing its resources to protect it?
Yeah,
And when I put my attention on what I care about rather than what's threatening me, and we're not talking about someone coming at you with a knife. We're talking about more emotional, turbulent kind of stuff. When I put my attention on what threatens me, then it calms my brain down because it realizes the danger is not as imminent, and that enlarges my perspective so I can see what's going on. And then from that calm space, I can re-engage with someone, or at least I understand why I'm reacting the way I am. And with practice, I can become curious about why they did what they did that upset me.
yeah.
And um, generally, what emerges is people discover really they love each other, and the way they're expressing that love sometimes comes out in a wounded way. Um,
Yeah.
but when you can see that, then the loving intentions beneath the actions surface.
Tell me about compassionate communication. I had never heard the phrase before until I started researching for today's interview, but I thought it was kind of a interesting dynamic, and it something that you've took extensive time to perfect. So please break this down for us.
All right. So when I found compassionate communication, or nonviolent communications, it was called when it was originally founded. For me, it was the same stuff I've been doing all my life, but it was like going from hand tools to a power tool because it was such an effective way of organizing our perception and giving our mind insight into what was going on. And um, this ties into what I was talking about earlier, is there's two components of compassionate communication, or four components. Two are communal and two are individual. And the individual is the observations, because I'm at the epicenter of my perception, and also the actions that I like to take. For example, I don't really care for movies, but I love going to plays. So we all have these individual preferences, and we're also perceive things differently depending on our perspective. And then there's the communal side of our being, which is feelings and what Marshall Rosenberg called needs, what I would call yearnings, the motivators of human behavior. And those motivators, which we don't have much language to talk about, are things like food, clothing, shelter, but also companionship, acknowledgement, respect, care, and shared reality is a big one, knowing that there's a community that we belong to. And so it is really a way of studying how we use language patterns to increase the potential to connect with others without giving up our own autonomy.
Mm,
And I just find it immensely powerful.
yeah.
And
Yes.
I'll just say one other thing about this because it's really dear to my heart, which is there was a time when there were structures built into our culture because our lives weren't that very different from our parents' lives. We were farmers or cobblers, or whatever it was. So all this kind of cultural wisdom was conveyed from generation to generation to generation. And starting really around World War II, that all dissolved. And change happens so fast now, and I can listen to young kids talking. I don't even know what the F they're saying because they use all this language. They're just like, huh? You know? And um, so the transmission of what it means to be human and the norms and the structures that support a vibrant, thriving uh, ecosystem, we have to bring those into deliberate consciousness and not just assume that circumstance is going to convey them. And so um, I would say by studying the compassionate communication, that's part of that cause. There are other things that do that too, but it's like, can I be conscious and deliberate about the way I communicate? Can I tap into the fundamental things that make us human? Our care for one another, our willing to sacrifice for those that we love, and our willingness to stand up and defend what we care about. But all that stuff, we tap into that and bring it into consciousness so that we support it. Because man, we are in rapid change, man. That tidal wave is at the door.
Yeah.
And I tell people sometimes, actually, I say this pretty often, we live in transform or die times.
Right.
And the transformation ain't going to stop. So we got to, you know, um, we got to figure out how to get away from thinking that winners or losers. If I'm benefiting, then it's at your expense. That's so ingrained in our thinking. And actually, I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller, who at the end of his life said that what we have to do is shift our consciousness to one of abundance instead of scarcity. Our whole economic system is based on scarcity.
Mm.
Because if we think we're going to be left out, we have to defend ourselves. Our imperative is to survive. And so when Mandela brought in all voices, then people realized they weren't being shut out. And so they didn't have to jump into that fight to survive mode. And, um, so you got me going. I didn't know I was going
No,
to talk about
absolutely.
all this stuff, but you asking such penetrating questions.
No, I was just floored about your research and the book. Talking about the book, actually, Radical Authenticity, Strong Medicine for Turbulent Times, but just your story about your dedication to making sure that we're heard and we are expressing ourselves is giving me a little bit of the warm and fuzzies. Shout out to the
Yeah.
Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Organization as well. When you were crafting the book, though, how did you go about prioritizing what chapters you want to write about, what topics, which the sequencing of it all? You're also author and curator in some respects here. How'd you go about the process of making sure it was the book was pretty much set and ready to be shared?
Was pretty much what?
Set and ready to be shared in the way in intent, like in the intent you would like it to be shared.
Well, so really the genesis of the book. So I'm the executive director of the Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network. And I send out a newsletter once a month where I write about current topics, kind of like a column. And, um, in 2016, when things started, it became fashionable to belittle others and to be rude. And I went back and I looked at some of the essays I'd written because I'd written a lot about this kind of stuff, and I just rewrote them, polished them up and made them coherent to put in a book. What I wanted to do with the book is we talk about compassion. We talk about being nice to each other. Those are abstractions. What does it mean? What does it look like? So the book is kind of full of stories from my life that hopefully put flesh on those abstract concepts so you have a sense of what it looks like to be compassionate and considerate of others. And so I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
No,
that's
I think you did. I mean, because I really feel like you could really end up down different rabbit holes as about how you could apply some of your findings into real life, or even to thought experiments for not going into real life. And so it's always fascinating, just from artist to artist, or author to author, or creator to creator, how exactly you made sure it was wrapped up in a way that you were satisfied but able to be consumed by someone else. So it's always a good thing.
yeah. I'm someone who you know has followed international politics. I'm pretty politically aware, and so that gave me lots of fodder, lots of things to talk about. Um, um, just responding to what was going on with current events and reflecting on what was happening from a compassionate point of view. And so basically, humanity itself just gives you plenty of material if you pay attention. So that's really where, and then a lot of it. So there's an ethic that's really, really important to me. And I think about doctors, for example, who I won't recommend a medication to someone if they haven't already tried it, because they aren't willing to ask someone to do something that they would not be willing to do themselves. And that ethic to me is really important. So I figured the only person that I really am an authority about is my own life. And actually, one of the things that drives me nuts sometimes when I'm watching the media is someone will get up and talk about what someone else's motive is. You don't know what someone else's motive is. And so the only person I'm an authority to talk about is myself. So I wanted to draw experiences directly from my life and use them as models and reflect on how events that were happening impacted me, or just my thoughts of how to work with, how to metabolize events that were happening. And some of the events in the book are intense. And, I'll just tell you, because my publisher talked me out of it, but originally I was going to call the book Compassion is Not for Wimps. Because it takes courage to look at something that you find distressing, either because it's really painful or because it rubs you the wrong way so profoundly, and bring compassion to that situation. And so anyhow, that's why I call it strong medicine, because it talks about um, stuff that I think is pretty difficult, um, but in a compassionate way, I'm hoping.
Yeah. Well, the Radical Authenticity, Strong Medicine for Turbulent Times is available now, available wherever fine books are sold. But, Mr. Steele, this has been a cool conversation. Didn't talk with you about everything. But now's the fun part. If someone's watching right now, how can they interact with you?
The best way to interact with me is, what is the best way to interact with me? They can, the best way to interact with me, because it has all kinds of security on it, is to go to rmccn.org. That stands for the Rocky Mountain Compassionate Communication Network. And then if you go to the accredited facilitators page, there's a way to contact me directly that has anti-spam security and stuff on it. I'd love to just give out my email address or my phone number, but these days it's just really not safe to do that.
Yeah. Well, this has been another edition of GBN Global Book Network. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And thank you for your great questions. I could tell that you weren't just like talking out of intellect, like your heart is in this.
Oh, thank you.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have drawn the conversation forward that we have. So I really enjoyed the interview. Thank you very much.
Thanks.